Austin, let's get to this issue of what's happening in Washington right now. The president or the administration has issued apparently criminal subpoenas to the Federal Reserve. People who support that action say, you know what? We want to get to the bottom of this. The Fed failed to respond to our queries, and this is an appropriate action. What do you think about that?
Look, I'm not a lawyer. I know that there have been countries that had criminal investigations of their central banks, but those countries are Zimbabwe and Russia and Turkey and a bunch of places that you would not characterize as advanced economies. Anything that's infringing or attacking the independence of the central bank is a mess. You're going to get inflation come roaring back if you try to take away the independence of the central bank. And I told you, we're on a path back to 2% inflation. We have been for 5 years. We've made progress at some points. At some points, it's gone the wrong way. That's not been an easy road. To try to blow up Fed independence is kind of a festering stink bomb in the middle of that road back to 2%. I mean,
with all due respect, Mr.
we
President,
need to be really careful.
That's not exactly responsive. You're not arguing that the Fed should not be subject to inquiry when there's a question about the veracity of something the chair might have said in front of Congress.
I don't like I said, I'm not a lawyer. The only reason I'm not answering the legal question of should this or that be investigated, I don't know anything about that. I know that in Chair Powell's statement, I agree with his argument that if you're investigating as a pretext because you disagree with the rate decisions, that's a mess. We should not be in that place. We should be taking the job seriously of setting interest rates, which we do at the FOMC. As I've said many times, you become a sworn member of the Federal Reserve, you're out of the elections business. The minutes come out and the transcript will come out. You can see word for word what's on people's mind, and people take the job very seriously. It's all about the economic outlook and the economic conditions, and that's where it should be. The law gives the Fed the job to look at the stabilizing of prices, the maximizing employment, and that's it. That's the job. It doesn't say anything about make the stock market happy. It doesn't say anything about make the president happy. It's maximize employment and stabilize prices, and we must commit to that. If Austin, we don't, to me, that's a mess.
Austin, look, I don't think anybody is happy about lawfare or the idea of coercion or anything else. The question I would ask you, and it's a question we get a lot from viewers, so I have great sympathy for the question, which is to the extent that you believe that the American taxpayer should be able to hold an institution, even like the Federal Reserve, accountable, not just for the decisions it makes, but for its spending in the context of a renovation and the like. What does that mean? Should the taxpayer be able to hold the Federal Reserve accountable? Should there be audits of how the money is spent and the like? Or is this money genuinely considered separate? You don't consider this taxpayer money? I know this is different than about the policy of the Federal Reserve, and I recognize the clear view that there's a coercive effort underway, and I hear all that. I'm just to those who are asking this other question about accountability over spending.
Okay, those are two different questions.
Totally.
It's not a criminal inquiry about budget overruns.
I recognize you could do this through hearings and other things too.
I think there were more than 60 audits of the Fed Reserve System, including the 12 reserve banks. We all have audits. There are system-wide audits, and there are audits of the Board of Governors. There should be, but we should not, in my opinion, and the Federal Reserve Act set up so that there would not be direct coercive control of the budget of the Fed because of policy differences over interest rates. I think that would be really dangerous if that's what you're asking. We should have oversight of costs. And my understanding is they've outlined here are why there were cost overruns in this Washington, D.C. building. That's something totally different than if you're mad about what the interest rate path is, should you be able to go over and bully the FOMC. I think that's just a really disturbing concept.
Ways to deal with this that are separate from a criminal subpoena. Austin, thank you for joining us this morning.